Hey Star Trek fans, Dan Gunther here with a review of the latest episode of Star Trek Discovery, Season 2, Episode 8, If Memory Serves. Longtime fans of Star Trek will really think of this one as a treat because there are a ton of callbacks and references to the original series, specifically the series' first pilot, The Cage, beginning with a really surprising previously on Star Trek at the beginning of the episode, not previously on Star Trek Discovery. Now, without calling out specific channels, there's kind of been this rumor going around and this theory that CBS is unable to directly reference the original Star Trek series or use elements from it. Instead, they have to be 25% different. However you would quantify that, I'm actually really not sure. But I think with this episode, CBS has definitely laid those beliefs to rest because they use actual real footage from The Cage in this previously on Star Trek because, of course, they are CBS and they own the rights to all of it. And in this case, I thought it was a really cool decision of them not to even use the remastered version of this footage, but the actual original effects and original footage. It was just a really nice kind of Valentine to the fans. And I realize that's a loaded term because that's how Burnham and Braga referenced the final episode of Enterprise, which was anything but a Valentine to the fans. But in this case, I think it really works. And it was just a really delightful way to start this episode. At the very start of the episode, when it said previously on Star Trek, and I hadn't seen anything else yet, I actually paused it, turned to my fiance and said, I am really going to love this because what a really cool way to start this episode. And all of the references and all of the callbacks had me grinning from ear to ear the entire time watching this episode. So at the end of last episode, Burnham and Spock in the shuttlecraft set course for Talos IV, and in this episode they arrive there, complete with Talosian singing plants, as well as the Talosians that we saw in the original series as well. I like the update to the makeup. It definitely brings it into the Discovery way of looking at things, the visual update that we've seen. And also, I have to say, while it wasn't necessarily a surprise to see Vina in this episode, I really appreciate the fact that they were able to keep this a secret and not have any, production photos or promotional stuff featuring the new actress's Vina because, like I said, even though it wasn't really a surprise, it was kind of expected, it was still delightful to be able to see that without knowing for sure going in that she would be in the episode. I also have to say that actress Elizabeth George does an excellent job with the Vina role. At first I was a little bit skeptical because she does of course look different from Susan Oliver, but she pulls off the role very, very well. There were a couple moments where she really sounded like Susan Oliver's Vina, and there were some really nice moments that flash you back to that original realization of the character. What really sold it for me was later in the episode when she appears to Pike aboard the Discovery as a kind of thought transmission from the Talosians. I thought she absolutely nailed that scene, with no small help from Anson Mount as Pike, of course, who, when I learned last week that they would be visiting Talos IV in this episode, I went back and rewatched The Cage, which I think, for anyone who's not seen it, or even if you haven't seen it in a long time, The Cage is required viewing for this episode. I have a regular group of friends that I watch Discovery with, usually on Saturday nights. So when I saw the episode a little early to, start writing reviews and doing my other video for it, I messaged all of them and said, go into Netflix, go to the original series, find The Cage and watch it because it will really help you out with this new episode. And everyone who did that was really appreciative that I had told them to do that. So definitely required viewing. The little recap at the start is helpful, but if you haven't seen The Cage, or even if it's been a while, it's really helpful to check that out before watching this episode. So as I said, Anson Mount's casting as Pike, I'd always appreciated and thought he did an excellent job. After watching The Cage, however, it kind of renewed my appreciation for what he brings to the character. He really does an excellent job of bringing that character into the 21st century, especially just the transition from the previously on Star Trek to the new episode. I know it's just looks, but he nails the looks. And then on top of that, his performance is just incredible. Like I mentioned, that scene with him and Vina in the ready room when they're transmitting their thoughts to the Discovery. I really feel Pike's pain and regret, longing and loneliness, and all of that all wrapped up. All of those emotions that Jeffrey Hunter showed in The Cage, Anson Mount just mirrors perfectly here. So absolute kudos to him and to the Discovery team in some excellent casting and some great writing as well. If you haven't already been able to tell, I'm going to be gushing about this episode. I think, for me personally, this is the best episode of Discovery's second season so far, and possibly the entire series so far. This is some really great work on the part of the writers, the people who realize the show through visual effects and through set design and casting and all of that. This just all came together to make an incredible hour of Star Trek. I'd put it up there kind of like in the area of Trials and Tribulations for the feelings of nostalgia that it gave me. For example, the sound design when they take the shuttle down to Talos IV and you hear those singing plants, and of course you end up seeing them. It just sounds like the original series. They even had some original series style musical cues that really added to this effect. It was a real treat to watch for sure. Although we got to see Ethan Peck as Spock in the previous episode, it's really this episode where we finally get to see him step into that role and perform. And again, this is an area where I think I was a little trepidatious. I was a little worried. Anytime a new actor takes a beloved character's role, it's difficult for a lot of people. And, you know, I'm very sympathetic to that. I understand that those are some very big shoes to fill. No one will ever reach the heights of Leonard Nimoy, of course. He originated the role. He's Spock. That's all there is to it. Zachary Quinto, I've always liked his portrayal. I thought he did a very good job, but to my mind, Ethan Peck surpasses him. And again, this is really only the first episode we've gotten to see him as Spock, but he has the mannerisms down. He has everything just perfect to a T. I've been told that he watched very meticulously all the episodes of the original series and studied Leonard Nimoy's performance, and it really shows here. Even just some of the quiet moments where he's not even delivering lines, but the way he carries himself and the way he looks at Michael Burnham, for example, really just embodying the qualities of Spock. And there will always be the comparisons, and when you see him on television, you'll always know that this isn't the original Spock. This is not the same actor. This is not on the level of Leonard Nimoy, but man, does he ever come close. And it's very impressive to watch. I think this is the best they could have possibly done. So kudos to everyone involved. I've seen a lot of people talking about the final revelation of what the schism between Spock and Michael Burnham was, kind of not landing properly or not being what they expected or as bad as they expected. However, I got very emotional at that scene. I thought that it was very well done and that it worked very well for me as a reason why there would be such a huge rift between these two characters. You have to understand, Spock, all his life, has been told by his Vulcan classmates, and certainly has known from the way his father treats him, that he is not a good enough Vulcan and will never be. His hope, when he's talking to Burnham, if you listen carefully, he's talking about how Michael had promised to take him to Earth and help him discover his humanity. And in that moment, Michael took that away from him and told him basically that he will never be a good enough human either. So what does he have left? That shattered him. And a lot of people say, you know, oh, kids are mean to each other at that age and all that kind of stuff. But this, to me, had a real finality to it. And with the idea of that Vulcans tend to mature a lot faster or base their entire lives on logic, you've got to imagine that these initial experiences, even at this young age, would have such a profound effect on him to carry through the rest of his life. And even as an adult, he logically knows that what Burnham did was just to push him away to protect him, but the damage had been done. He realized that his humanity was not something that he could cultivate from that moment forward. And he's kind of being cruel to Burnham. He almost twists the knife when he says, you know, I was wrong for idolizing you and I regret that. And you showed me that my humanity is dangerous and something to be avoided, because the example he had was Burnham, and Burnham was so horribly cruel to him that he could not be a human like her, like she was, because it was so horrible. That was really moving and really affected me when I was watching this episode. Speaking of emotional parts of the episode, we have a continuation of the Ash Tyler and Hugh Culber story here, which was another very affecting part of the episode. Hugh Culber is, I wouldn't even say it's PTSD. His trauma is so deeply ingrained. He died, and he remembers dying very clearly as he's talking to Ash Tyler and, puts his hand around his neck. He very clearly has a memory of what Ash did to him, and at one point he confronts Ash Tyler, and it's a very incredible scene. And by the end you realize these two characters are the same. Both of them are having a severe identity crisis. Tyler was split between the personalities of Ash Tyler and Voke, and Hugh Culber, isn't connecting to his new life. He feels separated and detached from everything. His senses don't match his memories and all this sort of stuff. And the effect that this has on his relationship with Stamets is so incredibly moving, because Stamets wants nothing more than to help him and to have everything back the way it was. And everything he's doing to help is so well-meaning and so well-intentioned, but just has the effect of seemingly pushing Culber away. And it's really heartbreaking to see. I feel like a lot of people deal with PTSD, and these experiences, from what I've read online from a lot of viewers who've gone through them, experience very similar things. Obviously, this is a very out there science fiction situation, but still very relatable for people who suffer from PTSD from returning from war and that sort of thing. Other aspects of the episode that I'd like to touch on, of course, have to do with Section 31. We see a little bit more of their kind of machinations. Georgiou kind of maneuvering herself to take influence away from Leland and claim more for herself. I worry for her, although I'm sure she's got her bases covered, that Leland's not going to put up with this for much longer, and probably going to try and take Georgiou out somehow. Unfortunately for Leland, he does not seem to be on top of things. He's unfamiliar with the Talosians' powers of illusion, and often seems to be coming out on the losing side of interactions between him and Georgiou, which is funny, it's comedic, but I can't see this lasting for much longer. The incompetence shown by Leland is going to have to either be rectified, or it's really going to result in Georgiou completely taking over from him. So yeah, things don't look good for him in the future. Also, I want to say one of the things that I loved about this episode was the fact that Discovery seems a little more willing to laugh at itself more now. A lot of the humor in this episode I really loved. Saru's line, for example, when he chooses to allow Ash Tyler and Culber to fight, and Pike calls him out on it. His line that's something along the lines of, there's not a lot in the Starfleet regulations that govern interactions between Black Ops officers who have Klingons grafted onto their bones and doctors who have returned from the dead. And his very snarky Saru voice was hilarious. And a few other lines as well. Burnham asking Spock if he thought the beard was working for him when, he asked if she had any questions of substance or something like that. And of course, at the end of the episode, when the Talosians make Section 31 think they've beamed up Burnham and Spock, and they have that lovely routine where Burnham says, "Say goodbye, Spock." Funny stuff. I'm really enjoying this. All in all, I have to say, I'm loving season 2 of Discovery, and this episode is the best of the season so far. I usually try not to say that because of the immediacy effect, so soon after seeing something, you usually love it and give yourself time to sit with it. Maybe you don't love it as much, but after having watched this one a few times now, I really, really enjoy this episode, and I love what they're doing with it. At the end of the episode, of course, Discovery seems to be on the lam now from Starfleet and Section 31, so curious to see where the story goes from here. We still have Ariam on board, who's exhibiting these symptoms after having had some information from that rogue probe of theirs uploaded to her brain, possibly. And Ash Tyler is now imprisoned under suspicion of sending transmissions and disabling the Discovery spore drive, when we all know it's not him. Pretty sure it's Ariam, based on the tried and true method of looking shifty-eyed at the end, right? We're pretty sure it's Ariam. So really curious to see how all these plot points turn out for the next episode and for the rest of the season. Like Burnham says in this episode, we're really on the other side of the looking glass now. So loving this, loving the direction it's going. Can't wait to find out more. But I want to hear your thoughts as well. What did you think of Season 2, Episode 8? If memory serves, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Thanks to everyone for watching, and thanks especially to the Patreon supporters for helping me bring these videos to you. If you'd like to help out the channel, just go to patreon.com/Kertrats. And any amount, even $1 a month, really helps me out. I really do appreciate it. Thanks everyone else for watching. Thanks for liking, sharing, and subscribing if you felt this video was worth it. And until the next episode, say goodbye, Spock.
Goodbye, Spock.